Cloaked in the Shadows.
Monday.
Andy, welcome to Cloaked in the Shadows.
Now, I'm hoping we don't get the background noise there at the minute, because there's an ambulance going in the back of us, so that usually they're going to take us away. I hope not. Right? So, what is Cloaked in the Shadows?
It's a weird and wonderful podcast. That's the easiest word to sum it up.
Yeah, okay, yeah, weird and wonderful. Yeah, now we have a guest with us today as well. I think this gentleman still is in the London area at the moment, but I know he's been around the block a bit. That's probably getting nicely after reading his books. Weird and fantastic. Do you prefer Phil or Philip?
Phil? Yeah, Phil, either. Phil's good.
Phill Webster with us today. Now, we've got plenty to talk about Phil today, yeah, because he's put a couple of fascinating books out and a few bits and pieces now. I think it's probably a good time, Phil, obviously, if you introduce yourself to everybody first of all, because the most we'll talk about your mediumship, I think, today. So it might be a good idea. Tell us a bit of the background about yourself.
Yeah, I grew up on the Isle of Wight. I was from Derby originally, but grew up on the Isle of Wight until I got to my early 20s. And then I just kind of wanted to get out of there. I felt very constricted there. It was, it was the 90s. There wasn't that much to do. So then I sort of went abroad. And I ended up staying abroad for about 20 years. I settled in Finland, of all places, but it was like a good base to sort of travel to other places from. And then I came back to the UK 2017, embarked on a sort of acting career, or like use the word career loosely.
Yeah.
It was fine, sort of was paying the bills with it. And that was kind of like really my sort of ceiling of success with that. Quite sort of happy with that. And then 2020 came along, obviously, and changed everything for a lot of people. And then something happened around my mum passed away just after the pandemic, and essentially something supernatural happened around her passing. And that was really the catalyst that sort of sent me in this completely different direction. I'm looking into spiritual practices and sort of resulted in 2 books and primarily learning about mediumship. So yeah, that's me.
That's a great start on that. Now, we have to, unfortunately, somebody here is a big fan of a certain film I know you've been in, which you've watched better recently, actually, as well. So we have to take a sidestep before we go into the proper stuff.
Yeah, I have to ask, because I know you did some extra work in Doctor Strange, and I absolutely love Benedict Cumberbatch, so I have to ask what it was like to work with.
That was, funnily enough, that film's like very much tied into this sort of like personal journey of what happened when my mum passed and all that stuff. I literally started on that film 2 days after she passed away, and I'd been waiting for it for a long time, all through the pandemic. There hadn't been any work and stuff like that, I got hired as what they call special action, which is kind of like somewhere between like an unqualified stuntman and an extra, right? So it was basically got hired because I got a martial arts background. So I got hired as like a warrior for the camouflage scene and spent 4 months on there, pretty much like 5 days a week. So it was good stretch of work, good money. Interesting to be on like a really big production like that on a Marvel movie. And I was pretty much like, it was 2 or 3 scenes that took place over all of that. And I was pretty much like standing a few feet from Benedict Cumberbatch. So ordinarily, I'd have been really starstruck and sort of impressed because he was in all of his Doctor Strange regalia with a cape and all that, and he was flying around on wires.
Not real, anyway.
Yeah, and normally, I would have been like, this is amazing. And it was quite amazing, but because of my headspace at the time, I was just kind of like, whatever. You know what I mean? There's Benedict Cumberbatch. That was kind of where my head was. I must admit, and there's a bit of a spoiler, but it's been out for a while. The most interesting thing for me on that, so they built like the New York set as well, and it was in Longcross Studios, which is sort of like Virginia Water outside of London. So we would have a lunch break on the set on the New York set. We just like would hang out there, and there was a trailer behind me next to Sam Raimi's trailer, the director, and it said BC. And I thought, well, that's Benedict Cumberbatch, and we were sat having a lunch one day, and then Bruce Campbell walked out, and we just like, me and a friend just completely flipped out,
I flipped out with that. My brother calls him.
Like my friend just stood up and saluted. I was like, "What are you doing?" He was like, "I don't know," and he just kind of nodded to us and wandered off and did his scene, which we got to watch amazingly, like from where we were sat. But yeah, and then we sort of was running around telling everybody else we were with like, Bruce Campbell's on set, and everyone was like 20, and they were like, no idea who you're talking about. It's like it was just me and him that were just completely geeking out. So yeah, I kind of got bittersweet memories around that, but it's one to sort of notch up on the, to experience. And yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I know what you said. Look, I've read your first book, Letting Glow, and this talks a lot about that because, like, you realised, didn't you, when unfortunately the passing of your mum, and on the set of this film is when you started to head into this mediumship, didn't you? Really, so.
Yeah, that was really because again, this thing happened around my mum passing, and then days later I was on that set, so we had a lot of time. And because of COVID, what's interesting as well, I'm just sort of like talking about Marvel, like Marvel insight here. It's got nothing to do with what we're really talking about. But if you look up the making of that film, they don't acknowledge that we were filming it when we were. And I think that there are some sort of there were still restrictions around COVID and stuff like that, and they just got on with it anyway. But they kept us very sort of, we were all very separate from each other. There was like a good bunch of us, but we were all like on a kind of like at school desks in like a big sort of, in a big hangar, separate from each other. So we were talking, but there was a very strong, separation between us. So I just really sort of buried my head in a lot of spiritual books and stuff like this, which again contributed very much towards me going towards this, the new sort of direction of mediumship.
Yeah, I think it does, because it's like, I've always believed it, and that's what, when I've listened to your other podcasts, I saw a similarity between me and you in some ways, Phil, actually. Because, like, I had, when I was younger, quite, I'm not saying that, I like you, I know you had a childhood, you could talk about it if you want to, it wasn't ideal, I don't think, for you, was it really? And mine was difficult, because my father's still alive, I've got a good relationship now, but it was a difficult man to live with. I know you had a difficult one as well. Yeah. My mum had a difficult relationship with her father as well. And it was, and I saw that and it's like, do you think, looking back at it now, if you had a better relationship with your stepfather and your father itself, would you have gone into the mediumship earlier, or would it have been in a different direction?
Yeah, I wonder, like, so my initial, like, with my mum and dad, was like really supportive. Unfortunately, my dad was like, an alcoholic and abusive towards my mum, but we were in a very good position sort of financially and all that. And then when my mum left him, which I don't blame her, we went and lived on the Isle of Wight with an old flame of hers who was like the complete opposite to my dad in terms of how he treated me. And he was just, I think, it's taken me this long to sort of realize like he had a bunch of his own issues, and that we just didn't gel. And I probably stepped in there like sort of took him completely out of his comfort zone. I was only like 8 or 9 or something. But I feel like I brought in a completely different energy to what he was used to as a very sort of traditional older man. And he sort of didn't know how to handle it. So he put a lot of restrictions on me. And therefore I felt like I sort of had to sort of, like close down my, what I really wanted to do. I had all these ideas about getting into filming and stuff like that, from an early age. And then that just seems like unrealistic around him, and on the Isle of Wight as well, I felt very restricted. So yeah, I do wonder. I've never thought of that before, that you've just asked. And I was, as we all were in the 80s, I was kind of interested in, sort of supernatural stuff. We got Ghostbusters and all these things. And so I always sort of had an eye on it as a kid. But yeah, he was always kind of like, no, that stuff's not going to do anything for you, you know what I mean, like films or any of this sort of fantasy stuff. So yeah, it just sort of squashed those earlier dreams of mine. And then I just kind of like hit my 40s and sort of came back to the UK and thought, I'm going to pick up where I left off almost, and it's worked out. So yeah. Interesting observation, thanks.
Yeah, I tend to be like that with a lot of things, but I know, do you want to tell Phil about the relationship you had with your dad, Amanda? It's similar, I think, in some ways.
I found it interesting, actually. I don't know if it's just like the age of that generation, but it's just like they seem to have like a sort of specific mindset, like this is what work is and that's not what work is.
Yeah.
And if you don't do that, it's like, well, you're not really working and it's not going to work out for you. And it's just like not accepting, that some people are just going to go down a different path and eventually it will work for them.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And in terms of the acting stuff, and the acting thing isn't really my sort of primary sort of concern right now since writing these books. I feel that this has really taken me towards what's really like sort of my core, sort of path or what have you. I mean, I'm not going to turn down acting jobs if they come up, but it's not really my real focus, But I must admit, like in defense of that way of thinking, sometimes I have caught myself on these film sets thinking, how how are we all getting paid for this? Like everyone's just pretending and, you know, like
Yeah.
making, you know, and like everyone's got a job. Like, what are you even doing? Like, it's like, if there is, I mean, as much as it is work, it's, you know, it's really good work to get, you know what I mean? It's not, you know, there definitely are worse things to do. So yeah, but yeah, no, I just felt like I had those sort of dreams squashed from the get-go, and then sort of adapted that mindset, and that never worked for me. You know, like I felt for my whole life I've never known what I wanted to do, and I feel that possibly, actually, just thinking of this now, was partly due to somebody saying, well, no, you can't do that, that's unrealistic, you know. So yeah, I think there's something in that.
Yeah, I think there is. I think, as I said, you're about, I think I'm a little older than you, and I know Amanda is a couple of years, should we say a few years younger than both us two, we'll leave it at that, right? But yeah, I think you're right, what Amanda's raised at the point you carried on, like, is different generations. You couldn't, I know when I left school, for example, and this is where I think you're following your heart and things, and this is what I'm talking about the point in a second about is, well, I left school, I expected to go work in warehouses, and like, it was like, podcasting didn't exist in the 80s, certainly, and we weren't encouraged to write books and stuff. Where we are, the three of us particularly, and so I think it's a good point for your book, this film, I'll come on to in a second, is back in the 80s, you weren't encouraged to actually do this sort of bits and pieces we all do. I bought my first poetry book when I was 39. When did you do your first novel, Amanda?
Mid-30s.
Mid-30s, and I know you're a bit older than us, Phil, these two books we're going to go into. Society's changed, I think, in a lot of ways. And that's why I think 2 books you bought out, these are fantastic books, really, really good they are. So,
thank you.
Yeah, I will talk about them both, and you've got another question, haven't you, too?
Yeah.
Yeah, so tell us about then, what made you want to do the first book then?
Well, yeah, I mean, the catalyst was really about that thing that happened around my mum passing. So, I mean, I've told this story a lot, but I guess just to put things in context, I'll quickly tell it. So yeah, end of the pandemic, start of 2021. My mum was on the Isle of Wight. I'd kept away, trying to do the right thing through all the lockdowns and all the rest of it. And we would FaceTime every day, and I hadn't seen her for a few months. And it was just after the Christmas in the UK that the government said, yeah, go home and see your family. And then like something stupid like Christmas Eve, they said, yeah, actually don't do that. And there was just like a lot of chaos around it. And as a result, I hadn't seen my mum for a couple of months because I thought she was going to come and see us for Christmas, and we decided against it based on what we were being told. And then I had that film coming up very shortly, like soon after that. So I was just kind of mindful of not catching COVID myself because I wanted to work. And so anyway, point being, I would FaceTime with my mum every day. And one evening I called her, and I knew all of her routine. She was on the Isle of Wight. It's very rural. We were in a lockdown again. This was like 2 weeks into January, and in 2021. And on this night when I called her, as she answered the FaceTime call, a man was leaning in from the other side of the screen. And I saw him long enough that I could describe him. He had thin and grey hair, glasses, looked kind of gaunt, looked like he was in his late 60s. And as she pulled the phone up, he went out of shot. And I said, well, who's that? And she said, who's what? And I said, well, I just saw someone. I said, who's the guy in the house? And it was like about 10 o'clock at night. We were in another lockdown. I knew all of her immediate surround, everybody around her, the neighbors and stuff. We've got no family there. There shouldn't have been anyone there. And she just didn't know what I was talking about. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, Mum. I said, are you like, you're in the house alone? And she said, yeah. And she just sort of sat down. And I could always tell when somebody was around because she would put on all these airs and graces, speak a lot more politely. It used to drive me nuts. Couldn't get a straight conversation out of her. And she wasn't doing any of that. And she wasn't doing any of that. And I think I interrupted her just once more. And I was like completely confused because I'd seen the guy, even though I hadn't seen him for very long. I said, really? I said, so no one's there? And she was like, no. And I thought, all right, well, I guess I was mistaken. And we talked for like nearly another hour. So, she didn't, again, acknowledge anybody else being with her. I believe that there was nobody physically with her. And the next morning, I was woken up to a phone call that she was having a heart attack and she passed away. So for all of the grief and the shock and all the rest of it, my mind kept going back to that. I was like, so what are we talking here? Like, are we talking spirit guides or ghosts or what? And I didn't know anything about any of that at the time. And of course, some people would say, well, you don't know that there wasn't anyone there. And I can still say I wasn't there, so I can't 100% say that there was absolutely nobody physically with her. But knowing the situations around her, knowing her routine, knowing the circumstances, the time of night, how much I knew, like her whole, day-to-day existence there, I believe that there was no one physically with her, and I believe that that was somebody letting me know that she was about to pass. But I didn't take it like that because my mind wasn't anywhere into any sort of spiritual sort of thinking at all. So that really sort of changed everything for me. And after a couple of weeks, I was like, well, maybe this is something I should start looking into. And then when I did start looking into it and learning about these things, I kind of started looking back at other stuff that had happened through my life. And it would seem that every few years there was something, like some odd thing, some like really profound, some not so much. But whatever they were, I didn't really sort of attribute any of them to anything sort of spiritual. I just thought, well, that was weird, or that was horrific, or whatever that was. But I would just ignore it and sort of move on. And then looking at everything through this new lens, it just really opened up everything and made everything make a lot more sense. Yeah. So that was really the catalyst to, and sorry, just to write in the first book, Letting Glow, I just kind of documented the journey.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I've got to pass them up to Amanda Reed, because I said it's an end production's cocked up here. But anyway, so Amanda, is there anything you want to raise a point on that, Karen?
No.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating because like it would be. I know at the minute in my family, for example, Phil, my mum's older sister at the minute, I know she's just got to go to hospital 2-3 weeks ago as I'm speaking, and she's been, well, I think she's lost the blood from losing the plot anyway, but she started seeing cowboys apparently sitting next to her in her living room, so that's why. But I think the journey on about there, my mum, it's what I've heard of before, to be honest, because I'm very interested in this sort of stuff, where it's like there's something coming that's leading you the way.
I know sometimes as well, like when people take photographs and they don't realise anything's there and then something shows up. It could be something similar to that, like she wouldn't see it, but you was like looking at it through the camera. You might have seen it that way, like
true.
the camera.
That's an interesting point. I've never thought of that before. Actually, I've never thought of that. Would I have seen it if I'd have been physically there? I've never thought of that. Thanks for that. A really interesting point. Because I have since sort of caught a few things on camera and stuff like that. So yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it.
Yeah, they do say like the camera thing is that it was saying the camera never lies, does it? I think it can distort things and manipulate things, but you look at the case like I've seen so many photographs, and you wonder, don't you, how like this other figures appeared in the background and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Some of the say it's trick life. I don't think it is. I think it's much more deeper than that.
Yeah, I mean, this person that I saw, he looked like he was physically there. She would have these sort of nurses go throughout the day to help her with her meds and stuff like that. They would just show up, make sure she took her meds properly, and give her a cup of tea and leave. They were there for like 15 minutes at a time, and they were never there after 6:30 at night. So this was like a good 4 hours after that. So initially, I just thought it was one of them because this person that appeared looked solid. He didn't look like a ghost or anything. So I just thought, well, it's one of the carers. And then I immediately thought, well, what the hell are they doing there this time of night, And again, just the fact that she just dismissed everything, and, I'd seen the person. If she wouldn't have been, not that I even need to sort of really say this, but she wouldn't have just flat out lied to me if somebody was there, you know what I mean? So it was just, I believe that there was no one physically with her.
Yeah, like I say, she's straight away with it. So I've had a bit of seen a couple of ghosts over the time, and I mean, you've seen one, haven't you? You say.
I've had a few experiences. I had an experience after my dad died, where there was a picture on the wall, and I was just sort of lying on the bed feeling sorry for myself because it was about a week after, and the picture threw itself off the wall. And it just felt like that was my dad's way, because it was very abrupt and just sort of saying, what have you got to feel sorry about? I'm the one that's dead, kind of thing.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. I was walking around because I managed to keep my mum's house for a while on the Isle of Wight. I'll just go there because I'm based in London, so I'll just go there and grieve, and just sort of sit there and just cry basically, and just kind of go through all that. But I'm glad that I sort of got to keep on hold of that for a while, because it just gave me a place to just literally go and do that. But I remember one day, and after sort of really learning about mediumship over maybe about a year later, and just sort of walking on the beach and just being like, okay, just give me something, And I got, funnily, like what you said, I really believe that I got my mum saying to me, like, well, it's the same for me, She's like, yeah, you're missing me, but it's the same for me. We miss you too on this side, So, you're not alone in this. And I thought, well, that was just such a different perspective from where I was. that I really believe that that was from outside of me. I don't think that I would have come up with that. You know, it just came in like, and it was kind of new for me at the time. Now I sort of recognize when these things come in like that. But at the time I was questioning all the time, well, is that me? Was that just a random thought or what? But it was kind of a really such a new perspective on, yeah, well, what's the difference? Yeah, like you said, your dad's like, well, I'm the one that died. You know, from their point of view, they've also had to separate from this. So yeah, interesting.
Other point I want to get onto, I know Amanda's got at least one more question, direct question I want to ask you. I've got a few bits myself. Is I always believe in anything they say, but is it a lot of the human stuff is hereditary from past and stuff. And I believe in this one, the mediumship as well, the abilities like you've manifested later in your life, like we have in our own way. Was this in? Do you see this in your mum growing up or in your dad?
Unfortunately, I don't really know. One interesting thing for me that sort of came up through something later was that my dad was adopted. So I don't know any of his side of the family. But that, funnily enough, that came up later in a reading from a medium who brought that up, which was like verification for me because I hadn't really told anyone that. Well, now I have, but but at the time, I was like, okay, and she described him physically and all that. So I don't really know his side of the family. And then same from my mum's, like my grandparents from her side passed away before I was born. And me and her, unfortunately, we never really had these conversations, which is very, well, I've kind of dealt with it now, but was really like frustrating to me for a couple of years there. I was like, well, what does she actually believe? I didn't know. But she was very she would sort of go within a lot and would sort of dwell on things and sort of go very deep on like into herself. So I think she probably had the potential, but she'd had sort of a very hard upbringing. So I'm not sure if she ever really, if her mind even really went to the sort of esoteric. You know, I feel she was a very practical person. So yeah, I wouldn't know.
Yeah, I think it's down to the fact way as well as like I think it's always there. I want your opinion as well, I'm wondering there as well. But the way your lives were in different generations. I know both for Amanda's parents, they had pretty hard upbringings, didn't you? Both your parents. So I mean, mine, like with that, that's a long story with my dad, and I'll take about that another day off mic. But my mum had the same as well. Her family, I think different generations are. I think in some ways we're getting more open nowadays, further along with the next generation stuff, to open our minds up to stuff like this. What do you think about that?
I think everybody has some kind of ability, but it's just like whether they like shut themselves off to it or open themselves up to it.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, in your case, Phill, then obviously, talk us about your journey as a medium. So it's documented in your book, I know about already. Have you found yourself being surprised the way it's developed, this ability of yours?
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel that lately I've gone through, for want of a better expression, I feel like I've gone through some sort of growth spurt just in the last few weeks. And that's a weird thing to say, but I can't think of a better way to put it. So you know, that first year of really looking into it and opening up to it, everything moved really quickly and progressively, and I started getting like sort of one amazing experience after another, whether that was just getting a reading from a medium. And I only went to see like a handful, and I never actually went to sit with one. It was always be walking into a spiritualist church, and then later on finding a development circle. So I never sort of sat and exchanged money with anybody or anything like that. But the hits that I did get were like so precise that I was like, okay, this is a real thing. And then learning about mediumship myself and getting those first few times of the most specific things, so you know, sort of practicing in a development circle and you know with somebody that I hadn't met before, and trying to give that person evidence of somebody that had passed over that they knew, and then just coming up with the most random stuff, and that person being like, that makes perfect sense to me. Those were all sort of really encouraging. And then I would say that I hit a plateau for like last year, like pretty much the whole of the year. I just feel like I hit a brick wall, and I think that was somewhat ironically around the release of Letting Glow, the first book, which was all about all this. But then all of a sudden my publishers were saying that I need to be worried about book sales and this and that, and it turned into this whole other thing that I hadn't really considered before. Yeah,
on the podcast that I listened to of you being a guest, you mentioned that you had an experience using a Ouija board. I was interested to hear more about that, because I had a sort of weird experience when I was a teenager.
What did you tell Phill about that before you answer?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I used to be in a children's home, and some of the older kids used to have bedrooms that were sort of out on the landing, so it was a bit under the radar of the carers who used to focus on more on the younger children in the main area.
Yeah.
And we all got together and did the Ouija board one night. And as far as I can remember, I think they tried to move it, but nothing really happened. But it was in my bedroom where they did it, and I remember going to the toilet afterwards, and like the room smelled like something had died in it, and I saw something in the mirror that wasn't me.
Wow. Well, that sounds scary. Yeah. Well, are you still with me? Sorry.
Yeah, we're still in.
All right. So yeah, I mean, I didn't have anything as sort of that sounded ghost movie, but yeah, my experience was just as a kid, we started messing around with one that we made, and a couple of us really sort of like took a shine to it and carried on sort of outside of the group when everybody else got bored of it. And I don't know, we had this sensation of something passing between us. It's like the best way I can describe it. Felt like this very sort of strong wave of energy that I described, and then my friend also said that he was experiencing the same thing, and then we kind of stopped doing it, but then I would get this sensation again and again, and it's an interesting one, because then my sort of beliefs changed as I got older, and I thought, well, I don't think, did that really happen? Was that really a thing, or was that just kind of wishful thinking, or were we bringing it on ourselves or something like that? And then, of course, since I've sort of come full circle again, and I believe that there was something going on. But I think that we just tapped into something. We wasn't prepared for it. You know, we weren't going in there with like a sort of, you know, an intention of any kind, other than hoping something happened. And we just kind of opened ourselves up to this thing, and whatever happened. And then, yeah, I don't know. I probably still would advise people not to use them. But then that being said, I have used one recently in a new development circle that I went to, and this was like sort of under the guidance of somebody that's been a medium for over 20 years. She you know, well renowned, and she's wrote a couple of books, and I felt very sort of confident that she knew what she was doing, and I think that it was all about the intention that we were bringing into it, and had really positive results. Yeah, it seemed to and again, I do bring an element of skepticism into pretty much all of this stuff. I don't typically just buy into everything just because it's spiritual or out there or whatever. I always kind of question it to start with. But yeah, I mean, it seemed it worked again when we were doing it. It freaked me out slightly, but there weren't any negative repercussions from it. So yeah, I wouldn't advise that anyone should use one. But under the right guidance, it seems that it can be, you know, actually, and just to sort of finish that off, like the teacher that I've got, she said, well, what's the difference? She said, you know, you're sitting and opening up as a medium and inviting spirit to come in. All the Ouija board is just just another tool to do that. It's just got all this stigma attached to it. So
yeah, it's a good point. It's a good point indeed. Now, the next bit I want to talk about is obviously, like, I know you've lived and you've done a lot with mediumship in other countries, haven't you, as well? Now, in book number 2, I found it very interesting that you said you've visited both North and South America on numerous occasions.
Yeah.
And are very interested in indigenous cultures on both sides of the hemisphere.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about your experiences with shaman. Not the music band, we did state. Actual shaman.
just showing your age now.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I got lucky enough to work with a couple of them. I was, when I wrote the second book, I wrote it right at the end of writing the first book, Letting Glow, and I felt like I'd learned so much about exploring all that and researching all these subjects that I was just so excited to just pour all of this into another book. So the second book was kind of less about me and my grief and learning as a medium, and more about sort of bigger spiritual practices. So it did touch on shamanism, but I am sort of also mindful of the fact that it's not really my story, and there is an element of cultural appropriation and all that. But, you know, the things that I've learned as well. But on the other side of the fence, I don't think that anybody really holds the right to connecting with spirit guides or anything like that. You know, we can all do it, but it's just trying to tread that fine line between not upsetting anybody and talking about these things as well. But yeah, like one of the people that I trained with is a man called Puma Singona, and he's part of he's from the South America. Sorry, forgive me, my mind's just going blank. And I just, one of the things that I found interesting was the similarities between like these ancient cultural traditions and modern day mediumship. They're pretty much the same thing, what we're talking about when we talk about connecting with guides and all this, from to ancient spiritual traditions. And then also, the more I looked into it, I also sort of went into learning about Celtic mythology and the stuff that we have around the British Isles, and how many similarities there were between us and other cultures around the world, thousands of years ago, when we weren't connected at all. We were divided by oceans, but when it came to spiritual practices, there were so many similarities that we were all doing the same thing in different parts of the world. So yeah, I just found the whole thing really fascinating, and I feel as learning about mediumship that there's a lot to be learned from those cultures.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely about them, Phil. It's like, I think as well as that is you find, that's what was interesting reading both your books was the simple fact was that you've travelled lots of different countries and you have seen so many different ways different cultures do things like, wouldn't you? So have you found the mediumship it's done in different ways in other countries?
I mean, since learning about mediumship, I haven't done as much traveling as I would like. Most of it was done like prior to that. I did just visit, interestingly, and I haven't really sort of had because I feel that, I suppose, well, it depends what sort of cultures you go to, but typically, you know, when you meet people day to day, unless you sort of actively go to some sort of spiritual retreat or something like that, that a lot of people don't feel comfortable talking about these subjects. Just at the end of last year, I went to, like, so randomly, I went to Iraq, to Kurdistan. Yeah, just like a filming opportunity came up, and like one day I wasn't going there, and a week later I was like in Iraq. I was like, okay, well, that was out of the blue. But I got to film in this place called Erbil Citadel, which is like the oldest inhabited kind of castle, for want of a better word, in the world. Like the oldest sort of continually inhabited settlement is the way that would be the official way to put it. And it's also allegedly the place where spiritual writing first began, which I thought was amazing. So we're talking like, I don't know, God, my numbers are really bad. Way before, you know, Christianity and all the rest of it. And again, like the place where spiritual writing originated. So I was just kind of expecting to go there and have this, you know, massive revelation. I was thinking, well, this can't be a coincidence that, you know, as a spiritual writer myself, that I'm going to the place where it began, you know. So we were filming in this place a lot. And I was expecting to, you know, like touch a wall and get some sort of, you know, vision of the Black Sea or something. I don't know. But I didn't get any of that. But interestingly enough, I suddenly did get this outpouring of like a new book that I've been writing, which I don't believe is part of these Letting Glow books that I've written so far, which seems to be way bigger than that. And I feel like I'm channeling this book as well. And just to sort of, I don't know, this wasn't really directly with what, in answer to your question, but I did speak with somebody the other day, because I was kind of, again, I didn't come away from that trip feeling like that anything, you know, that I'd had any sort of spiritual revelation or anything like that. But all of a sudden, this third book started pouring out of me. And somebody did point out that sometimes that can be like a triggering point. If you kind of believe that we're all energy and what have you, that, you know, I went there and then sort of came back with this whole new sort of, a whole new kind of vibration, for want of a better word. And then this book, which had kind of stagnated in me for like a year, just came pouring out. So yeah, it is interesting to look into other cultures, and I feel like there's so much to be learned from it. Around mediumship in the UK, there's a very strong element of spiritualism. I don't consider myself a spiritualist, but I've learned with those. But I'm also mindful of sort of stepping on the toes of these traditions, you know, of people that practice this for years. And then I'm just coming in and saying that anyone can become a medium. So yeah.
Yeah. I know you've got a third book in mind for your trilogy, haven't you? Initial trilogy. And you mentioned about another book you started work on as well. So is there anything you want to share about either of these two books?
Well, yeah, no, I did think that I was going to be writing the third book of Letting Glow, the Letting Glow trilogy, but it seems to be turning into something else. So I will get back to it. But I feel like the Letting Glow books are sort of more centered around mediumship and grief and all that. So, you know, I would like to keep that theme, whereas I feel like I'm moving into a different arena now with what I'm writing at the moment. But yeah, you know, it's been an interesting journey, and like I said, document my journey through towards mediumship. So if anyone's interested in that, then in theory they could sort of follow along with books 1 and 2. There are lots of meditations in them, and would guide somebody to sort of open it up spiritually and towards mediumship if that was something they wanted to go into. And yeah, you know, they're available worldwide at all the usual bookshops in the UK. You can order it from WH Smith and all the rest of them, Waterstones, and of course Amazon.
Brilliant. And obviously for yourself, I know already you've got a page on Instagram, haven't you? I seem to recall, if my memory is correct.
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm quite active. Well, Instagram mainly. I'm sort of dabbling with TikTok. And then I've got a website, Phill Webster. Yeah. But phillwebster.com is my website. So it's Phill with 2 L's. And then I'm sort of tentatively starting to. I've got an idea of like developing like an online circle where people can get together, you know, remotely through Zoom, and we can, you know, sort of explore meditation, talk about esoteric topics and all that. Got a couple of members so far that are eager for me to get it rolling, so I really need to get on with that next week. But yeah, if anyone was interested, then yeah, please do get in touch.
I've really enjoyed this.
You too. Yeah. Thanks. Nice to have met you both.
Okay, Emma.
Cloaking into the shadows.
Cloaked in the shadows.